let me tell you, if, let me pick on someone, let's pick on, sorry, what's your name? Philip. Great, I'm glad I chose a name I could pronounce. Okay, Philip, right, you're in charge of sales, okay? Right, you've got a budget, and it's a pretty good budget, right? So there's no game playing, of 10,000, right? You achieve a budget performance on sales of 12,000. Is that a good performance? You're 2,000 over budget.
Apparently yes, it depends if it's absolute or relative.
Okay, he's hedging his bets. let's face it, we would all go, woohoo! Right? But if I was to tell you we set...
I'm not a salesman.
No. You were very good, you were wise to hedge your bets, because I was going to prove you wrong whatever you said. Because if I assumed that the marketplace was growing at 10% to give me the budget target of 10,000, if it actually grew at 20%, I've lost market share and it's a bad performance. So the problem is that all these silos give us different and often misleading information. It's only by combining them all can you get relevant information in context of making a decision. So, let's move on the home track. Are you with me still? Nobody wants to leave yet? Okay. So, let's have a quick recap. If you look at the 1990s requirements, by the way, and the reason why I picked 1990s is because pretty much all the systems out there today were developed in the 1990s to support a 1990s business environment. Let's have a look at the difference between the two. Okay, 1990, annual focus, fixed period reporting. Today, we have a moving time horizon. And we have almost, whatever the date is, let's report the status on this particular date, because next week things could have moved on. When it comes to the budget content, you found back in the 1990s, it was financially oriented. It was all about the chart of accounts, sales, revenues, costs. And it was an internal departmental view, so marketing, you get your share of the basket to spend. And what's more, it was set in stone. You're going to have to stick with that for the end of the year. Yeah, but the world's changed. Well, it doesn't make a difference. You just stick with that budget. Doesn't make sense. And today, we find that we need to be not just financial, we need to be business oriented. In other words, is the money that we're spending on the activities worth the investment? Are we getting the return that we expect? It's a combined, not just an internal view of what's going on inside the company, but it's what's going on inside the world in which we operate. I think Jack Welch once famously said, we want to beat the competitors, not beat the budgets. It's about what's happening in the market that's really important. Rather than being set in stone, we find that today, budgeting and plans have got to be adaptable. If the world changes around us, we ought to change with it. There's no point in going ahead with a budget that no longer works, because it was set in a different environment. When it comes to management focus, in the 1990s, we all settled on financial reports, P&L statements by department, with some kind of variance analysis. Whereas today, it's much, much more. It's about the strategy map. How we relate organisational activities to organisational value, and whether or not, if like the different initiatives, how do we resource those to actually improve that business model? And finally, rather than have separate systems with some kind of linked access, what we really want is a totally integrated solution, whereby I can link strategy KPIs, operational KPIs, with financial targets, with budgets and resources, with weekly reports. They're all going to, because it's only together do they form a complete picture. Okay, so let's take a look. One of the things that we did earlier on is say, what should a new product do? And so I've come up with this, what I call, it's a budgeting framework, but at the moment this isn't Scorpion specific, it is just general. If I want to manage performance, what kind of framework do I need? What kind of system do I need to support this new view of business? And there are 4 components, and I'm just going to take a quick look through these 4 components. The first one is that there has to be a business model. Now, inside every organisation, there are a number of ways in which you generate value. And you can actually take a look, and here I've just taken an example. It's like there's a revenue stream opportunity. How do you generate revenues? Well, it might be through marketing programs, lead qualification, there are sales meetings. there's a series of activities that go inside the organisation to generate revenue. When you look at product development, there's a series of activities that must go on inside the organisation to make sure you've always got relevant products for the market, and then how we bring those products into production, and so on. Most organisations, there's about 5, 6, maybe 7 of these real high, how we actually generate value as an organisation. What I'm interested in, by the way, is that when I ask organisations, how do you generate value? Most organisations are unable to answer the question. They will actually give you very detailed plans of how they turn raw materials into finished goods, but if you ask them how they generate value for their shareholders and customers, it's a little bit vague. It's a little bit iffy. But the fundamental part is that there needs to be a business model that relates these things. And these activities are typically related to different departments within the organisation. Sometimes there's a one-to-one relationship, sometimes there's a one-to-many relationship. Some activities like corporate governance, we've got to make sure that all customer-facing departments are actually acting in an ethical manner that doesn't break the rules. Now, against each activity will be a series of measures. Those measures might be measures of resource, but they'll also be measures of success. So, in our way of thinking, behind every organisational activity will be an operational KPI that measures success. If that department is operating efficiently, what does it look like? What does success look like? And so on. Now, one way of doing this, I know this is a little bit small, but I'm just trying to give you some general ideas, is one way of planning for this is actually to come up with a driver-based planning model. And what driver-based planning does, it tries to relate organisational activities to, if like, different values that the organisation generates. For example, I've got an example here, net profits. Okay, net profit, you say, well, where's that driven from? And so you say, well, net profit comes from revenue and comes from costs. Okay, where does cost come from? Well, costs come from cost of sales and various indirect costs. So cost of sales, to produce the products. Where does cost of sales, how does that get generated? And you can actually follow back through the organisation right down to what I call a driver. So let's say cost of sales actually comes from the number of orders we have and the unit cost per order, plus also any associated travel expense related to that order. Now, every organisation is slightly different, but the first thing is to work out what this model is, how it generates value. And what we can then do once we've done this model is that simply by typing in some base drivers, for example, okay, if we change the unit cost to this, the system is able to then work out what the net profit should be. What this means is that you can generate budgets and plans just by changing a few drivers. Now, it's important to measure that these relationships don't change over time. And so one of the things that, for example, we do in Corpium is that we can run reports that show you what the relationships are, and then it's up to management to decide, okay, do we think those relationships will change over the next 6 months or 12 months? If so, what kind of relationship are we looking at? So that we can then generate a model. These models also recognise things like constraints, so you can't keep producing till the cows come home because there's going to be a limit on what the production facility can do. Or at which point you then have to go to a new production facility, so there's a step change in cost. And so the first thing in any system is the ability to be able to model the organisation. And driver-based modelling is a really good way of streamlining the budgeting process. There's a number of things to note about driver-based budgeting. They can only tell you about what's happened in the past. If you're introducing new products, then you really can't use driver-based budgeting because you have no facts based on how it may take off. So there's a few things here. They don't take into account unpredictable external events like the weather suddenly changing, but they're quite useful for getting a good idea of how the organisation operates. That's the first thing. So at the heart of every system has got to be this driver-based model of how the organisation generates value. The second thing then is to do with strategy. Now strategy, there are many methodologies for strategy, Six Sigma, Performance Prism, Balanced Scorecard. but all these methodologies have something in common. They're all about particular initiatives on improving the operation of the organisation. So, for example, if I look at this, here I've got a strategy map. So next year we want to build strong relationships. And here are a series of activities that we're going to do. And these activities will typically be focused on different parts of the business model. All right, but in the organisations I've worked for, you can't have a strategy that impacts everyone. It's just too hard. So to me, there's an area called business as usual, and strategy is about what are we going to do to change certain elements of our business model. And a great way of doing that is actually through something which I call initiative planning. And what initiative planning does, it says, how about coming up with projects that can be attached to one or more of these business drivers? Now, these projects have information like who's responsible, name names. We need somebody who can check this. Also, which departments are involved in actually contributing to that initiative? Why are we doing it? Why is this initiative being planned? When's it going to start and when's it going to end? How will we measure whether or not the initiative is being implemented or not? So we need measures of implementation as well as measures of resource. So let's take a look at this example. So here, for example, this is my driver-based plan. So I might say, look, I know that the number of visits I do to prospects has a direct impact in terms of revenue. So how are we going to increase the number of inquiries? Well, we're going to have a marketing campaign. Okay, who's responsible for it? Which departments? What are they going to do? Let's collect detailed resources so that we really do implement this, because we're making an investment in this particular initiative. And the whole thing about initiative planning is to allow people to come up with a range of initiatives and then to say, okay, we can't do them all, but which combinations are we going to do? Which combinations give us the best results based on the money that we have available to implement these initiatives? Also, perhaps if we start delaying initiatives, if we start bringing some forward, move some back, does that give us a better, does it keep us within our cash limits? And this is really what initiative planning is about, and it's a fundamental thing that we've built into Scorpion. It's got to be able to have initiative planning which then sits on top of the business model. The third thing is resources. To my mind, the resources is actually how we allocate the resources of the company, the people, the money, the assets. They should get resourced evenly between business as usual and anything to do with strategy. Now, in the last example, we had a look at how we put together an initiative plan. So we need to resource that. And what I say to people when you do budgets, and again, something you can do inside Scorpion, is the budget can be split into three parts. First part is what I call business as usual, and that can actually be the result of a driver-based plan. This is what we expect to get if things continue as they are, just by changing a few drivers.